Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
So good afternoon all together here. My topic is a study made about anthroposophical medicine, pharmacy, curative education under National Socialism. We can directly go to the first slide. It is a research project over 12 years, but it's more or less fulfilled. 3 volumes in a Swiss publishing house about the topic, 2,500 pages, so quite challenging. And the first volume is about the doctors, the anthroposophical doctors in this age. The second is about pharmacists or enterprises, Veleda and Vala, and the third one about psychiatry, anthroposophical psychiatry and curative education. It's a heavy theme. It's a very serious theme because most of you know that the Nazi time in Germany was a kind of what we call today a biopolitical dictatorship. It was a kind of a totalitarian system, but biopolitics had a decisive role. That means selecting life worthy to live and the other one. So an age of selection, extermination, but also an age of supporting life insofar it is regarded as worthy. And it was the beginning of the anthroposophical medicine. That means after 12 years, the anthroposophical doctors, the hospitals were confronted with a political situation which made it extremely difficult to go on with their medicine. And the same after 9 years with the first institution for curative education. They started in 1924. In 1933, this government came to power. So it will not be a theoretical approach, but it is a practical study. We really researched over more than 10 years the involved doctors, curative educators, and other persons at this time. It is a kind of a personalized historical writing. It's not so much about ideas and concepts, but also in how they incarnate in human beings. And to be clear, it is a very actual theme. It's not all about history, which does not repeat, but instructs, as we learned from Timothy Snyder. And we know that the age of biopolitical regimes is not over and selecting life. So it's also a study for the own students, not only for them. I'm teaching at University Wittenherdecke, medical ethics, and also at Alanus University. I'm part of the Goetheanum leadership and co-responsible for the general anthroposophical section. And I'm leading the Ita Wegman Institute for Basic Research into Anthroposophy. So maybe this, and then we will go on. I will present you some of the insights of this study, and these 4 points will be the main ones. So I will shortly sketch the NS ideology and its consequences for anthroposophical institutions. I will certainly talk a little bit about anxiety and adaptation, because suddenly living in a more and more totalitarian regime forces, to a certain extent, if you want to survive under such political condition. And it produces anxiety and adaptation. And then I will go on to instrumentalization and cooperation, to resistance and a kind of sacrifice, and to a kind of a summary, but including perspectives. So to start, the security service surveillance, as they called it, had the anthroposophists under close control. And we have many reports from this central security surveillance system in Berlin about anthroposophy and anthroposophists. And in contrary to modern statements, these reports are totally clear insofar that they say it's just the opposite of what we want to have. It's totally contradictory to our NS convictions, because anthroposophy and Steiner and the anthroposophists, they reject racial doctrines. They does not discriminate. They do not discriminate according to biology, genetic, and folk groups. They are individualistic. They are international. They are pacifists. They are humanistic. And they are close to Judaism. They are close to Judaism. They have many leaders in their branches without Jews. Steiner was friendly. He was against anti-Semitism in all forms. And so these were all statements in all these reports. One sentence from the last report from 1941, so the summary is based on these findings. It must be concluded that anthroposophy is in all its forms, whether it be the Christian community or an agricultural, a medical, an educational, or an artistic method, presents a danger to the unified National Socialist orientation of the German population that cannot be underestimated. It is enormous, and how serious they took these 7,000, only 7,000 anthroposophists, known anthroposophists in sense of members of the society, and most of them were not very politically active. So a very small group, but they took it for very serious. So I know we have many new studies about the convergence, about the possible convergence in Steiner thinking about history and evolution and the Nazi ideology. And Peter Staudenmayer is the most famous in that country. But we have clearly to say that the NS surveillance report, they don't see any affinity, and they just underline it's the total opposite. And this had consequences which are written there in the sense of control, restriction, abolition of the anthroposophical society, and further oppression and persecution. And to go on a little bit, yes, to live in such a state or under such social conditions, and they were getting worse from year to year. Life conditions under a totalitarian regime creates anxiety and all forms of adaptations. And so kind of adaptations are memberships in NS organizations. Of course, we try to find out how many anthroposophists join the NS party or other institutional organizations. It is 25% of the normal German population, but not zero. But of course, a lot of them wanted to manifest that they are according or they wanted to belong to, or so, but the rate is lower, and they had a difficulty to come into the party, because if they were known anthroposophists, they were not accepted to the party. And of course, we found, which was not surprising, we are not the first researchers, many declarations, rhetoric declarations of the school teachers, of some doctors, of other groups, also of the curative educators, that they are not enemies of the state, that there are common targets, good schools, healthy nutrition, healthy medicine, and so on. And then we found a lot of compromises mainly to keep the institutions open. So let's say the Waldorf schools, which are not belonging to our study in the narrow sense, the Waldorf schools, they were forced in the first year of the regime to drop out, to dismiss the Jewish teachers. If not, they were closed. So the Waldorf schools as private schools, if they wanted to go on with their work, they had to dismiss the Jewish teachers. And they did it, but they took care that they got a Waldorf school in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, in the USA, and so on. They took care for the colleagues, but they dismissed anyhow. Without, the school would be closed. So to keep the institution at this time created or results in these compromises, but also the curative education homes, they had to dismiss severely handicapped children sometimes and to take healthier ones. And the government had the opinion that those severely handicapped children with a genetic burden does not at all balance the impact of their kind of therapy and so on. So you can imagine also in this short time of the presentation how difficult it is to go on under such conditions. But then instrumentation and cooperation, there were interests of the regime. In so far that we have some prominent Nazis, politician of influence, and they had an anthroposophical family doctor, which was quite good. Or they were interested for their family in healthy vegetables, or were interested in, or they had a handicapped child. So these motifs were quite strong in a smaller group of influential politicians to keep their hands on several anthroposophical institutions, not all of them. Private interests or affinities, I called it here. But then a little bit beyond the family, let's say one of the leading professors for political education, Professor Alfred Bäumler, he found the Waldorf schools interesting. He had a feeling they educate in a way that these are at the end well-educated, grown-up young people. So the states needed a kind of a next generation, and he had the feeling that the Waldorf schools, they have a pedagogical tool which they should not be all closed. So he wanted to have the schools as model schools, and he kept two open till 1941. They had to distance from anthroposophy and had to change their historical teaching. But then under this condition, they could go on. And then it's getting even worse, the SS interests of Heinrich Himmler, the elite. They wanted to have vitamins in nutrition, so they were interested in products from the biological side full of vitamins. They were strongly interested in agriculture without chemical fertilizers, especially for those East European countries they want to occupy, which they did finally. And they thought, there we have no chemical industry. So if the biologic dynamic method is valid, then we can use them. So what they did, and this is well known, in Dachau was the biggest one, around the concentration camp, they created cultivated areas, and the prisoners had to work there as forced laborers, and they had the biologic dynamic gardening, and they had experts from the Demeter Association. Not many of them, but some of them were willing to cooperate. The motifs were complex, but this is not my topic. But it is in the sense of Himmler, it was a tool to evaluate these methods scientifically for the sake of the state, for the imperial sake of the state. So this is collaboration on a very high level. And then, of course, we heard the music from Sigurd Rascher, this wonderful saxophone, player, and who combined in the US saxophone with classical music. But his brother, Sigmund Rascher, was the main SS doctor in concentration camp Dachau, who made these brutal human experiments there for the mainly military purposes. And one of these experiments was to create frozen damages. People died, really. And in one of his tests, he tested biological creams from different producers, if they are valid to heal these cold frozen damages. And one of the factories producing such creams were the Veleda, which is well known now in the German public. So this is what we can call a kind of collaboration. And now we come, it is the second last point, to what we can call resistance and opposition. And first of all, the maintenance of inner identity and the maintenance of solidarity was enormous in the anthroposophical institution, in the beloved communities. If I quote the lecture yesterday for curative education, they kept the image of men, I would say, their own image of men, which was contradictory to the image of men in their surrounding. It is enormous how they went on with their practical work, with their study work. And they had also a kind of what I called medical guidelines and ethical values, strictly against compulsory sterilization and euthanasia. So we found more than 1,400 case records of the psychiatric hospital of Dr. Husemann. And we could show how for every single patient, they really tried to avoid, they tried to protect, they tried to come to other diagnoses and so on. And these living communities of the curative education homes, they were working on a wonderful level. They went on with their inner identity, with their inner values. Most of you will know that Camp Hill started as a refugee community of Jewish origin, Jewish anthroposophists, 95% of the whole König group, and did a wonderful work there in Scotland. This is Ito Wegman, who in a way was the guardian of all these initiatives of keeping identity and also practicing opposition. But because we are in the United States of America, I will also mention Traute Page. Traute Lavrens Page, well known in the country, girlfriend of Hans Scholl of the White Rose Resistance Group. She survived the leaflets and the prison, and later on opened the Esperanza School in Chicago. And a lot of you know, German medical historian states there was no social group in this 30 years, 20s and 30 years in Germany, no health science discipline in the Weimar Republic, which was not permeated by ideas of reproductive hygiene, eugenics, racial improvement, or positive or negative racial hygiene. But this is wrong. We are not proud of our ancestors, but it is wrong. It was really a group which had other inner strivings. So conclusion and perspective, ambivalence, I would say yes. And I think this is also a very actual theme, to keep institutions open in a difficult situation of the political social life. Quite often has compromises, following compromises. It's very difficult to judge the value of the institutions, but if the institutions away, the Waldorf schools close and so on, then the children have to go. Then there was an element of illusion. It's a very good terminus from Karen Priestman, illusion of coexistence. A lot of Waldorf teachers, or not a lot, but some had the idea that they can have their Waldorf schools in a totalitarian regime, which is not possible. So the illusion of coexistence, a very good PhD, I think, from Karen Priestman in Canada. Even the illusion of healing the totalitarian system lived in the anthroposophical movement, that they thought if we bring in our anthroposophy, it will get better, or healing the evil. And sometimes I would also, the illusion of growth, that some of the Demeter functionaries believe that they will have big farms in Eastern Europe, and then it will all get better. The illusion of growth of an anthroposophical initiative without losing their own identity in a totalitarian system. And I would say, and come to an end, a lack of a genuine political judgment, a lack of judgment. And then I had no immunization. Sigmund Ruscher was also grown up in an anthroposophical family, but there was no immunization against evil. So we can't say that anthroposophy itself is protecting. It depends all on reception, I would say. Last point, light in the darkness. I think we shouldn't underestimate these inner values they kept, this respect of life in the sense of Albert Schweitzer, the dignity of life. So Hannah Arendt, in her essay about personal responsibility under dictatorship, she underlines very strong that we have to keep on going an inner dialogue between, she said, between me and myself, what she called thinking. So the need for going on with the inner dialogue, the voice of conscience, to dare to judge by yourself. And I would say, after all these difficult studies, in 2,500 pages, we have to say that a lot of them went on. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Dan and others, for the conference, for the invitation. It is for us as guests here a wonderful experience. Yes, we have in Germany a defamation campaign after 100 years, I would say, after 100 years, also in the old sense of 1933. After 100 years, there is still, and I think we saw some lightful aspects here, and with no defamation. And we hope that this kind of light experienced here in the conference, but also this kind of freedom in academic life, pluralistic views, not the science, but scientific approaches to the riddle of man, also in the sense of Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolution pluralism on a good level. This is also a wonderful element of what we experienced here in Hart. So thank you very much.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the Preston Fellows of Harvard College.